بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه مباركا عليه كما يحب ربنا ويرضى جل جلاله وعم نواله والصلاة والسلام على سيد الحبيب المصطفى صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So, dear brothers and sisters, nice to be here early with you. I've got another class to teach after this, that's why I need to leave at 3 o'clock. So inshallah the day will continue for you. I'm sure this is not the first time you're hearing about the great Imam Abu Hanifa. And some of you seem to have travelled from quite far. So for some reason this still seems to be a very pertinent topic. I would have thought that it's an old topic, because we've been working on this topic for the last 25 years literally. Since I think 1997 or so. So it's an old topic, but mashallah, there's a great reason to discuss this again and again to a certain degree, I think. Because a lot of what we do today is clearly based on what this one man did. And the reason I say one man, Imam Abu Hanifa, is because if you look at it this way, that the person who is actually born the year that Imam Abu Hanifa passed away, Imam Abu Hanifa passed away in 150 Hijri, and in that same year Imam Shafi is born. So he's never met Imam Abu Hanifa. But when he starts his work, he has to say that anybody who's interested in fiqh and jurisprudence, they are dependent on Imam Abu Hanifa. Why are they dependent on Imam Abu Hanifa? I think the one thing that sets him apart from anybody else before him is the way he took the Quran and the Sunnah and essentially distilled from it that which could be used by the masses. Because the Quran and Sunnah only hold a certain number of rulings, explicit rulings. Majority of the others that we would follow today as what's halal and haram and makruh and wajib and etc., that doesn't come directly from the Quran and Sunnah as in explicitly. There's only so much that the Quran and Sunnah can cover explicitly. Though it leaves for us, the Prophet ﷺ has left for us many universal guidances and other examples. So sometimes we have to say, while the issue that's come today has never existed before, so we're not going to find a clear ruling, but what we have to do is we have to find if there's something similar. Is there something similar? Sometimes you find something similar, but there are two things which are similar, and one seems to say it's okay and the other one seems to say it's not okay. So how do you decide that then? You can't just take one of them and just run with it and say, I don't care about the other one. There has to be a reason why you've dismissed the other hadith and accepted this one. Otherwise, you get what the scholars call tarjih bila murajjih. It sounds like a complicated term, but it's quite simple. Preponderance without a preponderator. Again, you're thinking, what does that mean? Preponderance without a preponderator means that if I've got two things here and I say, this is better than that. Why? Cause. You heard people saying cause. That's just when they're too lazy to give an answer, or they don't have an answer. It's just purely based on whimsical decision that this is better. They don't really care. There's an apathy towards it. That's what you call making one thing dominant in your eyes without there being any reason for that dominance. Why? What's the reason? If you have a reason, okay, then you can justify it. We make decisions all the time in our life. But we generally, anybody who's reasonable in the way they do things in this world, they're going to have a reason for why they do things. They don't just do things arbitrarily. And if they do, then very quickly they fail in a lot of things because they're making arbitrary decisions. So, when it comes to Imam Abu Hanifa, the decisions that they had to take, the whole majlis that they had set up was probably unprecedented. Yes, there were scholars before, ulama before, from the time of the Sahaba, who were providing various different inferences, looking at the Quran, Sunnah, and trying to understand and derive the ruling. They were doing that. It's not that he was the first to derive a ruling. No, many people derive rulings. Many of the Sahaba did it as well. But I think what's very unique about Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah is that he got a whole team together. There were about 30 people in his team. And in there he had people who knew the Quran very well, tafsir, etc. He knew, there were people in there who knew Arabic. They were scholars of linguistics. Right? So, because you have to, you need to understand a word. For example, there's one mas'ala about a wording in the Quran as to, it has two different meanings. There's words in any language called homonyms. A homonym is a word which has two equal meanings or more. For example, a simple example, the word ayn in Arabic, what does it mean? It means an eye, it means a spring, it means the letter, the ayn, and it means a spy, right? It means a spy as well. And there's a few other meanings. Ayn also in fiqh al-buyu, in buying and selling, ayn means item. That's like 5 meanings, and they, majority of them can be used. So how do you know which meaning is intended when the word ayn is used? That's a decision that has to be taken. So he got linguistic specialists together, he got hadith specialists together, and he got those who are very proficient in analogy. I know I'm throwing a lot of terms here, but I'm just here to introduce the rest of the speakers and all the complicated stuff they're going to speak about. So I'm just trying to give you like the idiot's guide to this kind of stuff, so that inshallah when you listen to them you'll be understanding what exactly they're saying. Analogy is what I said. You're going to look for, if you can't find a direct ruling about something, you're going to find something similar. And then see if you can take the ruling of this, which seems similar to this, and apply it here. Because how do you know you can or not? How similar are those two things? Does it allow us to take the ruling from here and give it to this one because they're very similar in terms of their form? That's what you call analogy. So there were experts in analogy that were sitting with him. That's why one of the teachers of Imam Shafi'i, which many of you may have heard of because there's this nasheed that went around, Shakawtu ila waqi'in su'a hifzi, right? Which is that Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, he complained to his teacher whose name was Waqi ibn al-Jarrah. And actually both of these individuals are actually buried in Cairo. I've been past both of their graves. Waqi ibn al-Jarrah is kind of a bit obscure. Imam Shafi'i's grave is quite prominent. It's actually closed right now for renovations. Waqi ibn al-Jarrah was a great scholar. He was a teacher of Imam Shafi'i, and he's the one who, Imam Shafi'i, when he had that spiritual dilemma, he complained to him about, I can't memorize enough. I've got a problem with my retention. So this same Waqi was one of the majlis, one of that group and that committee of Imam Abu Hanifa. That's where he studied. So when somebody started complaining about Imam Abu Hanifa, the response was, how can you even say that he can make such big mistakes? Because the people in his gathering, they were quite independent thinkers. They were not people who just, they said, Sheikh said something, so khalas, it must be it. As you know, the Hanafi madhab is very different from any of the other madhabs. In the sense that, in the Hanafi school, I remember in our community in Clapton, this was probably about over 25 years ago, there were our local brothers, the Tablighi brothers and others, right? They started saying that there's these two guys who have become Salafi. So I was like, okay. So then I was a bit confrontational in those days. So I went up to these brothers and I said, brothers, I don't want to speak to you. Which madhab do you follow? So I was quite confrontational, so I went and said, which madhab do you follow? So one of them said, about 85% Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, and about 15% Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad. Now, that for anybody else may freak them out that these guys are not proper Hanafis because they're not 100%. But that's our reality, that's exactly what we do. Many of our masail, 15% is an arbitrary number, it's not that. I don't know if anybody's actually done a proper statistic of this to see exactly what percentage there is. But immediately I understood what they were talking about, and I became very close friends with them. So essentially in many communities they would use these terms for somebody who just wanted to do something differently, or didn't follow the normal status quo that was going on for a long time, wanted to maybe study it. They were completely decent individuals who just wanted to study a bit more. Right? So that tells us that the Hanafi school has a majority views are according to what Imam Abu Hanifa himself said, and then the others are what the others continue to be stronger. Then there's some detail about those opinions also originally being an opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa. I don't want to confuse that too much here. But the point is that to Waqi ibn al-Jarrah was said that there are people in the gathering of Imam Abu Hanifa that if he was to make a mistake, then he's got Zakaria ibn Abi Za'idah, he's got Waqi ibn al-Jarrah, he's got Abdullah ibn Mubarak in some cases, he's got others. They will straighten him up. They will tell him what's right. They will turn him towards what's correct. How is it possible for him to, unless he wins an argument with them, and his discussions was never a monologue where he was just teaching and everybody had to listen. There was a constant debate. In fact, it mentions in the sources that sometimes for 3 months they would be on some cases, not every case, because you don't need to discuss every case for 3 months, but there were some really complicated cases. We're doing the iftar course right now. There are some complicated cases. You've got some ulama who said it's permissible, some ulama who say it's not permissible, and we're trying to decide which one to take. So sometimes we have to go into the argument. So it could take up to that long, and then eventually if they still couldn't compromise on something, agree on something, their compromise was that this is what Imam Abu Hanifa said, this is what Imam Abu Yusuf said, this is what Imam Muhammad. Sometimes you have 3 opinions, sometimes you even have 4. Imam Zufar said something else. They had the right to hold their opinions. That's very unique in that sense. Anyway, to go back to the great Imam, he started off different. He started off as a businessman. He remained a businessman probably for much of his life, but he started off maybe primarily as a businessman. Very successful one. Thing about Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah was that he was extremely intellectual. I guess if he went into any field, he would have been a genius. Right? It's just that alhamdulillah, Allah had written him primarily for fiqh. Otherwise, he actually started off initially through debates in Aqidah. And that's why it says that this is quoted from, he said, I studied Kalam so deeply. Kalam, the study of Aqidah and orthodoxy and defending the orthodoxy against heterodox opinions in Aqidah. He said, I studied Kalam so deeply that I reached a status where people would gesture with their fingers in my direction in awe that he's the guy. That's the great Shaykh. This was before he studied any fiqh. Wallahu alam, this is just conjecture that maybe while he was doing his cloth business, he had a way where he had a lot of other people seem to be working for him. In those days you could do that much more easily than you can do it in the UK, I guess, right? But he had time to do other things, and he was interested in a lot of intellectual pursuits. So it seems like he dabbled in Aqidah to such a degree that he actually became very, very proficient in it. He was just very good at formulating opinions and arguments as well. So on one occasion, there were a group of heretics, a group of probably agnostics or maybe complete atheists who came to him and said, we want to speak to you about a particular matter. So he probably knew their background or whatever the case is. So this is the way he played it. He said, you know what, I can't take your question right now. I'm really, really perturbed by another issue that I'm dealing with. There's another issue that's occupied my mind. And I've been deep in thought about it. So they got a bit curious. They said, what is the issue? He says, you know what the issue is that somebody just told me about a supply liner, a freight ship, which it goes through the waves on its own. It steers on its own, and it goes from its place of origin to its destination on its own. There's nobody steering it. Now for us, that's not difficult to understand today. He's just talking about a smart ship on board, right? The remotely programmed controlled ship. You can do that with planes now. You just probably have a guy there to make sure that, if anything goes wrong. Tesla's doing that with the cars. I've sat in the Tesla where you can just sit there and, sometimes it can go wrong, obviously. But it's not a big deal. They just looked at him in amusement, disbelief, astonishment, like, what's wrong with you? How can you even think about such an issue? It's just not possible. And that was the reaction he was waiting for. the strategy he used to respond to them, that was the reaction he was waiting for. As soon as they said that, he said, well, that's exactly the point of your question. That's the solution to your question. You're not willing to accept that even a ship can steer itself on its own, function on its own. Then how do you expect this entire universe with a lot more complexity and sophistication to be able to run its own course without a God to do so? And they got it. They got it. So they were not arch skeptics. They were probably just, questioning, and alhamdulillah, they got it, and they made tawbah. They came back, from their confusion. So that tells you that this story, I used to hear it a lot of the time, but it was only later I discovered that he was actually an Aqidah scholar beforehand. So there are 5 books that are attributed to him in Aqidah. Right? There are some questions about the accuracy, and there's a whole discussion about that. So, but there are at least 5 of them that are attributed to him, some more strongly than others, or at least I would probably say that if nothing, they reflect his teachings in Aqidah. But what happened on one occasion, he says that once. MashaAllah. So, on one occasion, he was sitting there, somebody came and asked him a question. It was a woman who came and asked him a question, and he didn't know the answer. So he used to sit close to the gatherings of Hammad ibn Abi Sulaiman anyway, who was the great jurisprudence teacher. So one day when he couldn't answer the question, he decided, there was an event that took place, and then he decided, okay, I think she went and asked the question, came back, told him, and he said, okay, I want to go and study fiqh. So he went and started studying fiqh. But again, any subject he took, he became the greatest in it. So when he took on that subject, slowly he started sitting in the middle, and then when his sheikh died, there was nobody else better suited to replace his sheikh in that position than him, and then that's it. It just went from there. It just went to, where we see it today. So, a few points that I want to make before I finish is... The battery's gone. It's alright, it'll come. Can everybody hear?
Yes.
Yeah, you guys can hear. Hopefully the sisters can hear as well. Yeah. As I said, I'm just giving you a few preliminaries to just pave the way for the rest of the speakers to come and provide their eloquent expositions of the great Imam, right? He was so into his studies and into his teaching that Imam Abu Yusuf, who later becomes one of his great students and a great Imam, and then the Qadi al-Qudat, the Chief Justice of the Abbasid Empire, and probably one of the sources of the Hanafi madhab spreading so as far as it did, because there's a question of how did the Hanafi madhab take over? I mean, at least why does 50% of the Muslim world represent the Hanafi school? Why do they follow the Hanafi school? We're talking about nearly 200 million in India. Well, some of them are Shafi'i. About 180 million maybe. We're talking about 170, 80 million in Pakistan. Bangladesh is I don't know how many, 150 or so million there. China, there's probably nearly 100 million there. It's just, subhanAllah, why is it represented? So there's various opinions about that. One of the opinions is that the Abbasids, who became the Khalifs, they used to have a good understanding. They used to always appoint Hanafi qadis, judges, in each of the areas that they ruled. Now, when you've got a qadi doesn't have to be a mufti, because a qadi is somebody who looks at the case, and then if he's an alim and if he's a jurist, then he can legislate directly. If he's not, then he has a group of jurists and muftis with him that he can consult. So a qadi is an official position. It's an official position, whereas a mufti is hardly an official position. Sometimes it is an official position, sometimes mixed up. But the point is that the qadis would be Hanafis. They would then want Hanafi jurists with them. So if now the Qadi is legislating according to the Hanafi school, and you've employed a number of Hanafi Muftis, that means in that town, that village, that city, or whatever it is, you've got Hanafi scholars. And when you have scholars in a particular place, then people are going to go and study with them. And then there was a natural progression beyond that through the Mamluks, etc. I mean, there have been others in between, but then generally speaking, then the Ottomans. Now the Ottomans, their whole system throughout the Middle East, primarily throughout the Middle East. In fact, today in Jordan, in Egypt, their constitution is primarily based on the Hanafi school, though they've made a number of amendments to that, right? Because that was the Ottoman, which is based on the Hanafi school, and then a lot of work was done, right? That's why they say that the two schools which really work for minority Muslims, Muslims as a minority in a non-Muslim majority, are the Hanafi and Maliki schools, because those two schools, you could say, were developed in those kind of circumstances. And one of the best examples of that is the Indian subcontinent, where even though Muslims ruled there for a very long time through the Mughals, they were always a minority. And I think some say they've always been around 15% since the mass conversion to Islam from Mu'ayyinuddin Chishti's time. Allahu Alam. But that's, I think, what is mentioned in one of the sources. So what's interesting here is that the Hanafis, why did they spread so far? So this Imam Yusuf could be considered, because he became the Chief Justice of Harun al-Rashid. And he wrote a book, Kitab al-Kharaj, etc. And then it probably continued from there. So Imam Yusuf came for a few days to study as a young boy, young boy, whatever. And then suddenly he disappeared. Right? Suddenly he disappeared, he didn't come to class. So when Imam Abu Hanifa went to find out, he discovered that his father had sent him to work. So the proposition he gave was that I'll pay for his study. In fact, it's later mentioned that they even had classes on Eid. Like even on Eid day they had classes. This was just something they really cared about. I mean, I've considered that a few times, but don't want to scare the students away. And like, this guy is zalim, right? But I mean, it'd be nice, even Eid day to have classes. Why you have classes on Eid day? But that's amazing. This just shows you the diligence that somebody has. You've got a mind, an intelligent mind who takes the right subject with the right diligence. MashaAllah, with the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's going to be a lot that's created. So now, this is a thesis, this is an idea. Why is there criticism that is generally quoted by people like Khatib al-Baghdadi, one of great, you can say a hadith historian, etc. He's written a massive history of Baghdad, which is such a celebrated work that he's pretty much got everybody in there who either lived in Baghdad and taught and studied in Baghdad, or anybody who passed through it, any scholar who visited it. He's just got literally everybody. He's hardly missed anybody. That's what's mentioned about this. So he's transmitted in there and in other places certain criticisms about Imam Abu Hanifa. So why is there criticism? So again, there's many responses given to that, but I have a thesis. My thesis is this, and I'll try to back it up. I think is that the level of inference and extrapolation, meaning trying to distill rulings from the Quran and Sunnah, right? The level and the depth at which the Hanafis have gone, right, with this really profound insight and this ability, this was sometimes misunderstood by others. They couldn't grasp this. They couldn't understand how this is possible, because they weren't willing to maybe look at it initially with a lot of depth. So it seemed like what you're saying goes against the narration. And one very typical example of this, which many of you may have already heard, is when one of the same scholars from whom Imam was a hadith scholar, Imam A'mash, rahimahullah, when there was an issue about a question he had, and Imam Abu Hanifa gave a few rulings, and he said, where did you get that from? So then he transmitted the very same hadith that he had heard from A'mash. And he said, you relate to me from so-and-so, from so-and-so, the Prophet ﷺ said this. And that's when Imam A'mash was just so astonished and taken aback that I've been transmitting these hadith, but I haven't been able to derive these rulings from here. And that's when he made this famous statement, which I think is very apt, very appropriate, which is that you are the physicians and we're just the pharmacists. So we maintain the store of hadith, we preserve them, we transmit them as they're, because that's a task on its own, to make sure that they're preserved in a particular way, especially when it was a lot of oral narration in those days. But then to be able to work with them and do something with those ahadith was a different way of preserving it. That's why the Hanafis have very few books, prominent books in usul al-hadith, because they've just incorporated their entire usul al-hadith into usul al-fiqh and the kitab al-sunnah section in that. Because why do we want a hadith just to transmit it? Let's use it. Let's operationalize it. That was the idea, to take a hadith and operationalize it. The other thing you could also say of why maybe so few narrations have been said to be transmitted by Imam Hanifa directly is because I think he believed in riwayah bil lafz as opposed to riwayah bil ma'na. It was very scrupulous. There's always been a minority, especially in the early generation, that insisted that the hadith must be transmitted with the exact wording verbatim. Now, if that had been the prominent, dominant view across the board, then we would have had very few hadiths today. Because imagine, to be able to retain, to insist that you must retain the exact wording from the Prophet ﷺ, that would have seriously curtailed the amount of hadith that we have today. That's why, majority of the narrations today are probably riwayah bil ma'na, which means they are a paraphrase of such, if I can use that term. They try, of course, everybody tries to maintain the right words, but sometimes they may change a word, right? They may change a word and think it means the same thing. Then that would depend on who's transmitting it. That's why we look at the hadith and say, okay, this is Abu Hurairah who's transmitted this, Abdullah ibn Umar transmitted this, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud transmitted this. But we think we should go with Abdullah ibn Mas'ud because he was a greater jurist than the other two. He was older, more mature, very close to the family of the Prophet ﷺ. So he probably understood it more correctly than the other two. It's not a denigration of the other two, it's just a fact of life that some people just understand things because they're in a better position than others. But the others are helpful for us to understand from a comprehensive perspective as to the various different narrations there. So, there was it Imam Ja'far or Ja'far al-Sadiq or Imam Baqir, one of the two, when they confronted Imam Abu Hanifa, that we've heard, when they met him, we've heard that you oppose the ahadith of our grandfather. So he says, he gave him a number of examples. Right? I think one of the examples was that who gets more inheritance, the son or the daughter? Right? He said the son does. So that's exactly what I say. If I was going purely on logic or intellect, right, a rational perspective, then I would have said they should both have the same. Right? Well, that's debatable whether that's an argument or not. But especially today. But he was then convinced. Right, according to, there's several other issues. I mean, as I said, the A'mash story incident highlights that. Another one is that Isa ibn Aban. Now he's a muhaddith, right? He was very much into his hadith and so on. And there's another student of the Hanafi tradition whose name is Muhammad ibn Sama'a, rahimahullah. He was a student also Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani. So Muhammad ibn Sama'a relates that I had a friend, a companion, whose name was Isa ibn Aban, very handsome young man, and he used to pray with us. Maybe they used to pray in the same masjid. And I used to tell him, come and attend the dars. This is after Imam Abu Hanifa's departed this world. This is Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani now, who's teaching. Come and attend his dars. Come and attend his lessons. And his response was that these people, they oppose hadith. So this is what you can see, that this was probably some rumor that he'd picked up on, and he didn't want to check it up himself. This is just normal human reaction except the very few muhaqqiqeen and those who want to verify things. There's very few people who do that. Most people just go with the flow. It's just a normal human trait to do that, right? We do that in so many things, right? There's a rumor that comes on WhatsApp and we forward it to 100 people, and then it turns out to be wrong, right? We should never be guilty of that, right? Especially anybody who wants to be worth their salt. Like if you want to be something and you don't want to be caught on the Day of Judgment having lied or being considered somebody to, to advance a rumor, then we need to be very careful with these things. So anyway, he says, these people, they just go against hadith. Now, he had a very strong interest in hadith. He was Hasanul Hadith. Like he was excellent in his understanding of hadith as well. Anyway, one day he prayed the morning prayer with us. So he prayed Fajr with us, and this time Muhammad ibn Samah, that was also the day when the dars was taking place of Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani. So Muhammad ibn Samah, rahimahullah, he says that I kept at him. I stayed with him. I said, no, you're going to have to sit down today. So he sat today. Right? And after Imam Muhammad completed his dars, I took him to Imam Muhammad and I said to him that this is your nephew Aban ibn Sadaqa al-Katib. That's his full name, right? This is the son of your brother Aban ibn Sadiq. So this is Isa, the son of Aban ibn Sadiq, your brother. So he's your nephew. So he said, my son, what is it that you think we oppose hadith in? What are your questions? What are your contentions? So he started presenting his contentions, and Imam Muhammad very proficiently began to respond to him. And brought in all the terminology. Okay, this is nasikh, this is mansukh, this has been abrogated, this one's still valid, and so on and so forth. And he gave him a wonderful exposition with all the dalail and all the the supporting evidences and so on. So after we had now come out, he was amazed, and he turned to me. Muhammad ibn Samah says that this Isa ibn Aban turned to me, and he said that between the light and myself there was definitely a veil. There was a veil between me and the light, and now that's been removed. In fact, then he says that I never thought that within the kingdom of Allah, within the world, within what is ever is existence, that there would be somebody like that who can teach people at such length. So this easy dismissal, just because maybe somebody said it out of hatred, somebody said it out of jealousy, somebody created this rumor for whatever other misunderstanding, could be many reasons, and then you just followed and towed the line. After that, he became a strong student. He became just about a permanent student of Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani, and then hatta tafaqqah, until he also learned his jurisprudence. Then eventually in the future, later on, what happened is that there was a need to provide a defense for many of the masail of Imam Abu Hanifa, and then he actually wrote a book on that. His book on usul is considered to be one of the founding texts from which then Jassas and others, many Hanafi ulama then took and expounded on the usul of them, on our usul al-fiqh. So he has a number of other things that he's known for. Another thing, but kind of interesting, one of the students of Imam Abu Hanifa, I think it was Uthman al-Batti, he studied with Imam Abu Hanifa, and he was from Basra. Now Basra was a minefield. Basra was like Birmingham. Well, actually Kufa was, Basra, Kufa. Basra had all the heretics. Imam Abu Hanifa himself, you don't mind that. Certain areas in the world just have this propensity, have this tendency to allow controversial ideas to fester, to be incubated, and then to be actually promoted. So you sometimes have the most extreme of all groups within that place, right? Birmingham's not that bad. My wife's from Birmingham, so take it easy. But Basra was known. Imam Abu Hanifa himself says that he went to Basra over 20 times to debate with the heretics. Sometimes it's the Mu'tazila, sometimes it's the Shia, sometimes it's other groups. Right? So he was going there, you could tell he enjoyed this and he was very good at it. Over 20 times. And he used to silence them, he used to convince them. And he had, mashallah, a lot of success in that. Anyway, Basrans didn't know Imam Abu Hanifa and his fiqh. Right? They didn't know it, and I'm not sure if they had a bad impression as well. I'm not sure if they had negativity towards it. But one thing was that they were very in this Uthman al-Batti, when he was about to leave, Imam Abu Hanifa gave him some advice. Because when you leave your teachers, like, what should I go and do in my hometown? So Imam Abu Hanifa told him, look, I don't want you to rush and start your own gathering. Because in those days, you could just go and take one of these pillars in a masjid that was free and just sit there, and if somebody came around, you could teach them. I'm assuming, right? So that's how things were taught. In a masjid, you could probably have several durus taking place at once. This is his pillar and this is his pillar. You can have that happening. For example, if you go to the Jami al-Umawi, when I was studying there, you had Sheikh Abdur al-Halabi's lesson was always in the right hand side corner down there outside his room. But then there could be other durus on other sides. So that's quite normal. And they never used to use a microphone either. It was just small, So anyway, he told him don't do that, but he had a lot of zeal. He went to Basra and he started his dars, Qala Abu Hanifa this and Qala Abu Hanifa that, and he was thrown out of the masjid. Like, who's this new guy you're talking about here? Imam Zufar was an older person. When he finished studying, he was also from Basra. He went to Basra. He did something different. He went and he sat in the existing classes. And what he would do, and this is very interesting, what he would do is he would sit there, and when the discussion on a fiqh issue came up, he would present some of the views of Imam Abu Hanifa without mentioning his name. That, there's another opinion which says this. And those Imam Abu Hanifa's opinions were wonderful. They were very logical, very intuitive. So when you heard that opinion and you're struggling with how to resolve an issue, and then somebody comes, it's like a breath of cool air. But he never said who it was. So slowly they're looking at this person and saying, he has some really good ideas. Where's he getting them from? He says, okay, where'd you get this from? He said, this is what I picked up from Imam Abu Hanifa in Kufa. That's how they say that slowly the Hanafi madhab made its initial penetration into Basra. This is very important to understand as well. I mean, I use this same idea in America. Because when I went there and I was an imam in a masjid that had hardly no Gujaratis, I think there was only one throughout the thing. There were about 2 Pakistani students, right? No settled. There were a few Afghanis who were settled. Mostly Arabs from different backgrounds, and just a complete mixed gathering. Now there you can't go and keep talking about the Hanafi madhab openly, because it's going to contradict what they know. And if I keep mentioning the Hanafi madhab only, then where in America in general, I mean, it was the idea that you don't have to follow madhab, so already you're labeling yourself and people aren't going to trust you. So eventually the strategy I used was, I would mention that when there would be a fiqh issue, I'd mention that there are several opinions here. I would mention 2 or 3, because remember, I had Malikis, or at least people who were supposed to be Maliki in front of me. I had supposed to be Shafis in front of me, right? And even if they didn't know they were Shafi or didn't profess to follow it, that's what they've been doing all of this time. The Malikis have been doing X, Y, and Z all of this time. Now, if I insisted on the Hanafi school there, it would be really difficult. They will say, so you mean I've been wrong and the scholars I've heard from have been wrong for the last 30 years? Do you understand? You can't. That's not the way of da'wah. There's a way to do da'wah. And again, we think all the madhahib are valid in their own right, which is another issue. So the way I started doing this, I would mention that, in this issue there are about 3 opinions, and I would mention the 3 opinions without saying whose they are. So now at least I've acknowledged that what they've been doing is a valid opinion, right? But then I would say that I go with this opinion because of X, Y, and Z evidences. So now if they want to switch over, that's fine, right? Now if they want to take this opinion, that's fine, right? Which is the Hanafi opinion. That's what I would then speak about. So again, that's just an idea of mine, that one of the reasons for the criticisms against the Hanafi school is that I don't think a lot of people appreciated the depth and the profundity of the inference, the extrapolation the distillation of the masail, how deep they could go to do this. Right? So then, you're just going against hadith because look, the hadith apparently says this. But no. So that's why if you actually look at what a lot of people have argued is that if you look at the sum number of ahadith that Imam Abu Hanifa has actually transmitted, he hasn't formally transmitted them. As in, حدثنا so and so, so and so, قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. What he's done is he's taken them and he has transmitted them as rulings. Because you can't, in those days, and I mean maybe now you can get away with it, even now you really can't get away. We have heretics online who come up with the wackiest ideas, and they have a few followers who are loud, but the majority clearly understand their quirkiness and they dismiss them. They probably only watch them for amusement, which you probably shouldn't even do because it's all about likes today, right? It's all about likes today. So even watching some people for amusement sometimes is actually supporting them, because a lot of these people, they're just worried about likes. How else do you make money on YouTube or gain fame? It's all about likes and subscriptions and comments and all the rest of it. So you just let them die a fate, let them die at their own fate. We leave that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, the scholars have to respond, right? But the rest of us, we just leave it, right? You understand it's wrong, you found out it's wrong, just leave it. So there was no way that Imam Abu Hanifa could have mentioned so many thousands of masail, because remember, there's a number of scholars who've argued that if we're going to clarify what Imam Shafi'i said, it's a very profound statement what Imam Shafi'i made. Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah said that people are dependent on Imam Abu Hanifa for fiqh. It's not because there was nobody else doing fiqh, but the way he did it, the depth that he went, the extents to which he went. He basically laid out for the people afterwards the way to do fiqh. So now, even though you've got a Shafi'i school and a Hanbali school, they owe their debt to the Hanafi school, because the Imam Abu Hanifa in particular set out that methodology of codifying law and doing it in this really comprehensive and a widespread way, which obviously gave an idea and a style and a model for others to follow. So that's one way of looking at what Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah said. Not just like, okay, he was a great scholar, he was a great faqih, so you're dependent on him. No, it's much bigger than that. It's a bigger idea than that. It's the whole tradition that he started. And then of course you had great ulama that have lived throughout. They did not condemn him, right, for what he was saying. They could understand where he was coming from. They may have differed in terms of the technical foundation of what he's saying, but it was a valid ijtihad for them. And so Imam Malik, when he had a meeting with him, and Imam Abu Hanifa left, and they asked him, what do you think of this person? He said, this is such an intellectual person that if he was to say, لو كلم هذه السارية ذهبا, if he was to say that this pillar is made of gold, he'd probably be able to bring you evidence for that. It was just in fact, some of those who observed him very closely said that he had so much intelligence that even in the way he stood up and he sat down, you could tell he was a very intelligent man. How do you do that? You can, because you just watch them, and sometimes the way they stand up to avoid something maybe, or to do something the right way, and if you don't get that, then there's a problem, right? Anyway, I think I'm going to stop now, because I said I've got a class to go to, and I'll give much more time to our other esteemed guests. MashaAllah, I've just laid out a foundation here to try to pave the way for what they're going to do, inshaAllah. I take leave from you. Jazakallahu khairan. And do you guys have a question and answer time? Meaning afterwards or something? Because, well, I guess maybe the scholars, if they have time, they can do it, inshaAllah. Jazakallahu khair. Keep us in your du'as. Barakallahu feekum.